What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about why the Atlantic provinces of Canada are less populated. Now, as far as Canadian provinces go, I don't claim to know a whole lot, but I know even less about the Atlantic provinces, which include New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And honestly, looking at them, I would have assumed, they're islands or they're by the ocean, by the coast. I would assume they're very, very desirable places to live, just based on that, their geographic location, and being by water and being cool places. But apparently, that is not the case. As put by this video we're gonna watch, why do so few Canadians live on the East Coast? Why? Why is that? I'm very curious. There must be several reasons. So let's take a look. Let's find out.
Before we get to why Canada doesn't have a major East Coast population center, we should first explore just a little bit how Canada was colonized, grew, and expanded through the decades.
Oh, okay. So does this just have to do with history? Where people ended up migrating to Canada or spreading out through Canada? Is it just random chance or by looking into the past, we may understand the present. You didn't think this video was going to get so philosophical, did you?
Long before Europeans set foot on North America, of course, Canada was home to a wide array of indigenous peoples with rich cultures, traditions, and trade networks. But because this is about the Canada of today, let's go ahead and jump to when Europeans first landed on the continent. In terms of European exploration, modern-day Canada is believed to be the first region Europeans would explore. Around the year...
Oh, wow, I never even thought about that. That's actually really cool. Thinking about it, the first place Europeans, when leaving Europe, would have explored would have been to go across the ocean, and they would have bumped into Canada first. They would have bumped into the Atlantic provinces first. So why didn't the entire population of Europe just end up in the Atlantic provinces? Doesn't make any sense. No. Let's continue before my harebrained conspiracy theories continue.
Around the year 1000, an expedition by Norwegian explorer Leif Erikson would establish a short-lived settlement named Vinland, thought to be located in present-day Newfoundland. However, it was not until the late 1400s that a more sustained exploration and settlement would begin.
I've heard of Leif Erikson. This is something that we learned in our little American history and education growing up. I know he sort of visited North America. I did not realize it was specifically Newfoundland that he found. That's actually really cool to know.
In 1497, under the patronage of England's King Henry VII, explorer John Cabot would set sail for the Americas, where he's believed to have made landfall on the island of Newfoundland. His expeditions demonstrated the abundance of fish, setting the stage for lucrative fishing grounds that would attract future European explorers and settlers.
Everyone is just discovering Newfoundland. Discovering Newfoundland. It seems like anyone who ended up there probably was like, I discovered this place for the first time. No other human has ever seen this before me, for sure. They're discovering Newfoundland one after another, determining that it's a good fishing place, good place to live. This history so far would lead you to believe that a lot of people would have lived here and thought this was a great place to live. Maybe that happened for a while.
But while England would kick off the current exploration of modern-day Canada, it would be France who would actually settle the region first. France entered the scene in the 1500s when Jacques Cartier was tasked by King Francis I to find a direct maritime route to Asia. Between 1534 and 1542, Cartier made 3 voyages, and he would eventually explore the Gulf of St. Lawrence and claim the land for France, naming the territory Canada, derived from the Iroquoian word Canada, meaning village.
Right, Canada. The French coming over. I remember some of this Canadian history. I swear, some of it has stuck with me.
The French would be the first to establish a permanent European settlement with the founding of Quebec City by Samuel de Champlain in 1608. Champlain's establishment became the foothold for France in the Americas, and he is often called the father of New France.
It's funny because I think most Americans don't know about French history and intersecting with Canadian history and founding of Quebec and Quebec City and all that stuff. I think a lot of Americans just assumed French ended up in Canada by magic, by a wormhole forming in space or something. Like, there's actually a real fascinating history behind it.
Early French settlers forged alliances with multiple indigenous tribes, primarily to establish fur trade networks.
Okay.
Due to competing interests in North America, the 1600s and 1700s saw frequent wars between England and France. In 1610, the British established their first permanent settlement called Cooper's Cove, today known as the town of Cupids on the island of Newfoundland.
The British had like an outpost on Cooper's Cove, Newfoundland. This is actually sort of more detailed Canadian history that I don't know of.
British and French colonies coexisted, but with increasing animosity and frequent skirmishes. A culmination of global British-French tensions would lead to the 7 Years' War between 1756 and 1763, more locally known as the French and Indian Wars in the colonies, which ended in British victory. The 1763 Treaty of Paris led to Britain gaining control of almost all French territories in North America, marking the end of New France. Then the British North America Act in 1867.
Oh my gosh, this... I'm getting a little lost. I just realized I'm like just transfixed on listening to this dude talk about Canadian history. It's pretty fascinating. And somehow by the end of all this, it's going to explain historically why people didn't end up so much on the east coast of Canada, even though it seems like everyone is discovering Canada on the east coast. Everyone seems to be like staking a claim, or the British are forming a city in Labrador. People really care about the east coast of Canada because it's the most accessible side to Europe and England, which is really relevant at the time. So I'm still a bit confused why so few Canadians live on the east coast to this day. But let's continue.
7 marked the beginning of Canada as a federated nation, initially with 4 provinces: Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. The westward expansion of the Canadian Pacific.
Those are the first provinces. I didn't know that. Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. Those are the first 4?
Railway brought promise and opportunity, leading to the inclusion of other provinces and territories into the Confederation.
Yeah, they just finally started traveling to the west, and they're like, holy crap, there's 4 more provinces worth of land here. When I look at a map like this of Canada, something very obvious occurs to me. There's way more area. There's way more space in Canada to the west. Way more space. That alone could explain why there's larger populations of Canadians on the western part of Canada. Well, most Canadians are like south, and a lot are in Ontario, in a lot of major cities, and that all would lead me to sort of have an explanation for why physically there's not a lot of people in eastern Canada. There's not as much space.
Canada's settlement began on its east coast much in the same way the United States did. But where many of America's first cities became some of its largest population centers, Canada's did not. But before we get to why Canada's largest cities are not on its east coast, if you're enjoying this...
Why Canada's cities are not... That's right. Canada's major cities are not on the east coast. That's another really important reason. Anyway, this guy's asking people to sub to his channel, and I gotta respect, because this is a good video so far, so yeah. Canada's Atlantic geography. Okay.
When most people think of Canada, they're probably thinking about a few key areas. More often than not, they'll think about Montreal and Toronto, which are within Quebec and Ontario, respectively.
Right.
They'll probably also think of British Columbia, the home to Vancouver on the west coast of Canada.
Americans have heard of Vancouver. A lot of Americans don't know where it is, or what British Columbia is, like, as funny as that sounds.
And they may even think about Alberta, home to Calgary, Edmonton, and Canada's vast oil industry.
True.
But what they probably don't think about as often is Canada's smaller Atlantic coast provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island,
True.
New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia.
True. And I don't even know why that is. Like, nothing against these provinces. They seem awesome, but for some reason, and I was even saying this at the beginning of the video, I know some things about the other provinces that are more central Canada or western Canada, but for some reason I know a lot less about these guys, the Atlantic provinces, tucked over in their little corner by the ocean. It's like some kind of mystery, some kind of secret society I don't know about. So I think he's spot on about that.
Which is crazy because these provinces are quite spectacular.
Yeah!
The geography of the Atlantic provinces is shaped by the Atlantic Ocean and defined by a diverse blend of ecosystems, from the highlands to the lowlands, forests to tundra, and bountiful coastlines.
Exactly. Exactly. This kind of thing begs the question, like, why don't more people live there? Maybe just from a geographic standpoint of, like, space and proximity to other provinces or cities. But you can't deny these places are amazing, beautiful places that anyone would be absolutely stoked to live.
The area is dotted with thousands of lakes, carved by rivers, and features several major bays and inlets, notably the Bay of Fundy, known for having the highest tides in the world.
Ridiculous.
The easternmost areas, such as Newfoundland, present a rugged terrain with fjords, mountains, and barren cliffs that plunge into the sea, whereas the mainland part of Labrador is a mix of boreal forests and Arctic tundra.
Okay. I mean, once at the same time, once you start talking about the Arctic tundra, it stops becoming quite as appealing to move into the Arctic tundra. But with that being said, there's lots of other parts of eastern Canada that are probably not freezing cold, you know.
As we move south, the terrain shifts to the rolling landscapes and fertile valleys of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island.
Yeah, I forget this a lot of the time, as silly as this sounds, but it looks like Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island are more south than a lot of the states in the US. So they probably have like a real similar climate, probably like some of the warmest parts of Canada, probably some of the most picturesque. Seem like really, really cool places to live.
The latter marked by its vibrant red soil and sand. New Brunswick's geography is equally diverse, boasting dense forests, fertile river valleys, and the far northern tip of the Appalachian mountain range. And the coastal location of these provinces influences their climates, leading to relatively moderate temperatures, but also high precipitation, including heavy snowfall in the winter.
I was wrong. Because of how water works. Because of how science works. When you're close to large bodies of water, that can influence rainfall and snowfall. Okay, that makes sense. That makes it less accommodating as I thought initially.
In many ways, Canada's Atlantic provinces share many of the same geographic features of the United States' New England.
Yeah.
But unlike New England, Canada's Atlantic provinces don't have a major city to call their own in the same way that New England has Boston.
Right. Why Canada doesn't have a major East Coast city? Yeah. Why is there no major East Coast city? Isn't there Halifax, Nova Scotia? I've heard of that. That's got to be pretty important. Like, I've heard of it even. But it's not like there's a Toronto, or like you said, a Montreal, Quebec City, Vancouver, by the Atlantic provinces. And that could be, I mean, for a lot of people, that doesn't matter as much, being close to a gigantic city with millions of people. Like, lots of Americans don't have to or even desire to live by massive cities. But enough people do desire that to make a difference. Maybe that's what it is.
Canada does have cities on its east coast, but none of them are nearly as large as Canada's other major cities such as Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. And this is odd because, given the continued power and influence of ports on establishing major population centers, the assumption would be that Canada would need a major city on its east coast in order to facilitate trade.
I never even thought about it like that, but that's totally true. That's from like a business or national standpoint of Canadian trade and export. You'd think there'd be big hubs, big cities and ports along Canada's east coast, you know, for exporting and importing trade and goods. What, is that not the case?
And while Canada does have Halifax, Nova Scotia, a medium-sized city with a fairly large port, it doesn't break into the top 10 of Canada's largest cities. And much of this has to do with a single, massive river. The St. Lawrence River has really been foundational for Canada. Its size and width has allowed for not only an abundance of fresh water, but also the ability for large freight ships to travel in and out with relative ease.
Oh. no kidding. The St. Lawrence River. I've never thought about the St. Lawrence River till this moment. That allows people to what? Get from the Atlantic Ocean down into, what is that? Would that be like Lake Ontario? And in between? Is that what this is all about? So it's almost like a lot of provinces that are more west are ports. They can be ports because they have a little access back out to the ocean. I never thought about that. Wow.
And perhaps most important is that the river connects directly to the Great Lakes, allowing for transportation directly in and out without the need for a land crossing.
Wow.
In many ways, the St. Lawrence River is to Canada as the Mississippi River is to the United States.
Wow, I never knew that. I never thought about this. I mean, you'd still think that's a big pain in the butt to take your giant, like, ship full of shipping containers all the way down that river. Why not have more places along the East Coast? Well, I guess another part of it is like you want to bring those goods to the most populated places in Canada, which are those major cities. It's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those are the biggest places in Canada, and they're always gonna be because they're the biggest places in Canada, and people are gonna go there. And all the ships go there because they're the biggest place. And they're the biggest place because ships go there, and it just is kind of a never-ending circle somehow.
So it's not surprising that Canada's oldest city, Quebec City, exists at the mouth of the St. Lawrence.
Yeah.
As the French were looking for a route to Asia, the St. Lawrence's sheer size would inevitably lead them to believe that it could go quite a ways inland and maybe even to the Pacific Ocean. Now, given its size, the St. Lawrence River made transportation relatively easy in a country that is otherwise pretty rugged and cold.
Yeah.
This really enabled many of Canada's largest cities to grow in ways they otherwise would not have.
I am so glad this is a part of this video. I never thought about the St. Lawrence River. No offense to the St. Lawrence River, but I never thought about you. The St. Lawrence River is just crying right now, weeping, because some American on the internet didn't know about it. But this is really fascinating and explains a lot about why Canadian cities are where they are.
Canada's largest city, Toronto, exists in what would be called Canada's Golden Horseshoe, named in part because it has an abundance of fertile agricultural lands, combined with an incredible amount of fresh water. But while agriculture was and still is very valuable, shipping it could be quite expensive. And it's for this reason that we see major cities appear along the St. Lawrence River, or even on a tributary river such as Ottawa, rather than the East Coast.
Oh, there's even a little branch off of the river that goes to Ottawa, even. And I don't think that's by accident.
It's far cheaper to transport things by water than by land. And the fact that goods can be made, produced, grown, or manufactured in Toronto or Montreal, and then shipped downriver and out to the world, was far more enticing than transporting them by land to Halifax first.
Never thought about it like that. That explains why there's not more major cities on the east coast of Canada, on the Atlantic provinces. And that explains why there's not as big of population centers on the east coast of Canada or the Atlantic provinces. This actually all makes a lot of sense now. It's not because these provinces are like undesirable or bad places to live. It's more has to do with like geography and trade routes, actually.
Helps explain why the Port of Montreal ships approximately 40 million tons of cargo every year, compared to Halifax's less than 20 million tons, despite Montreal being hundreds of miles inland.
Canada's Atlantic provinces today. Okay.
As I've already mentioned in this video, Canada's Atlantic provinces do have a lot of Canadians living within them, and they do have plenty of cities dotting the east coast of the country. While these 4 provinces might not have as many people as Toronto, they still combine to create an incredibly important region for Canada as a whole.
The 4 Atlantic provinces altogether don't have the population of Toronto? That's insane. I think it's just insane how many people live in Toronto, is what that says.
Canada's Atlantic provinces are led by Nova Scotia with about 1 million people in total.
Okay.
This would be followed by New Brunswick with 775,000 people.
Wow!
Newfoundland and Labrador with 510,000 people. And finally, Prince Edward Island with 154,000 people.
Okay, I did not know how few Canadians lived in these provinces. This is like incredibly few. Honestly, that could be really kind of nice depending on what you're looking for in a place to live. Like, these are literally 4 provinces where you know the population is probably some of the lowest in all of Canada. So if you kind of like that smaller town, open feel, this could be perfect for you. I mean, it's probably just nice that Canada has a bunch of different options. Kind of like you can choose what state you want to live in the United States, but based on your tastes and stuff. That's kind of what this is. So there's only, I don't know, 2.4, 2.3 million Canadians in these Atlantic provinces. Out of 38, 39 million Canadians, only 2.3 million live here. I had no idea about the proportion like that.
Notably, however, while Prince Edward Island has the fewest people of any full province in Canada, it's also the province with the highest population density due to its area size.
Oh, they're all all 154,000 people are just squished, stuffed onto the Prince Edward Island because it's so great.
Canada's other provinces all just happen to be really large. And this region would be led by the city of Halifax, Nova Scotia, with about 465,000 people within its metro region.
So it turns out, like, literally, the more big cities you have, people tend to move close to those. They tend, on average, people like to live near or in big, giant, cities, hustling and bustling and all sorts of activities available. That's most people, probably. And those just don't exist in the Atlantic provinces. That's what it is.
This would be about 1/10 the size of Montreal, Quebec, which has about 4.2 million people.
Wow.
Following Halifax would be St. John's in Newfoundland and Labrador with 212,000 people.
Wow.
St. John's also has the distinction of being the easternmost city in North America. Moncton, St. John, and Fredericton in New Brunswick would be the 3rd, 4th, and 5th largest cities in the region, with 157,000, 130,000, and 108,000 people respectively.
I mean, there's more people in Montreal. There's twice as many people in Montreal as all of the Atlantic provinces added together. That's crazy.
Prince Edward Island's largest city would be Charlottetown with about 79,000 people.
Okay.
All 4 provinces combined have a population of only 2.4 million people, which is a little less than the Vancouver, British Columbia metro region. Canada's Atlantic region features some incredible landscapes. But the fact that the St. Lawrence River was able to connect the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean probably stunted its growth. And because of this, these 4 provinces will probably always be smaller than their inland neighbors.
All right, and there you go. That was actually a very educational video. That was informative and, like, well presented, like, clear to understand. That was by Geography by Jeff, and I got to give that a like. That was fantastic and answered the question, why do so few Canadians live on the East Coast, live in the Atlantic provinces? And it's nothing really that the Atlantic provinces are doing wrong, except if you want to say not having giant major cities is doing something wrong. But that's just because of history and rivers and trade routes and major cities being located places. That's literally why. When I heard the title of this topic, and it is like, why are the Atlantic provinces not as populated? I assumed, there must be something negative about them, So I'm afraid there's something bad going on. It's like, no, nothing like that is going on. It's literally just a difference in how, I don't know, geography was set up, which determined all of this stuff. So I assume the people who live in the Atlantic provinces love it and have a great time, and people who live in other parts of Canada love it for other reasons and have a great time. And it's kind of cool. Canada has a diverse set of provinces with different populations that you can kind of choose if you want. If you're in a situation to move around, you can choose where you want to live based on what you like, which is great. I actually really, really enjoyed this topic quite a bit. So anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment, perhaps with your thoughts on the Atlantic provinces and why they're less populated and how they compare to other provinces. All that stuff would be fascinating. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.